Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Perchuk. I'm the Deputy Director of the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, and welcome everybody to this conversation with Andrea Bowers and Charles Gaines. This is the third and last in a series of conversations we've been doing here in Miami as a prelude to a project next year called Pacific Standard Time, which is, we believe, the largest visual arts initiative ever undertaken in the United States. It's going to have 48 museum exhibitions, all linked together, stretching from San Diego in the south to Santa Barbara in the north, and from Santa Monica out to Palm Springs, including exhibitions at the Getty, MoCA, LACMA, the Hammer, pretty much every museum you've ever heard of in Southern California. All of whom will be looking at aspects of art produced in Southern California between 1945 and 1980. But we didn't want the project to be entirely a historical phenomenon. And so we've asked some younger artists, Andrea first of all, to do some work responding to work produced in the year between 45 and 80. And if we have time at the end, we'll take a look at some of those images. But we don't have very much time, so I think we should get right to it. And so both Andrea and Charles are going to show short video clips, and then we're going to have a conversation. So Charles, do you want to set up the first video?
Yes, the 6-minute video clip from a larger piece entitled Manifestos. And I need to set it up so that you know.
Charles, you got to speak up. They're having trouble hearing.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Okay, this is a video clip from a larger installation titled Manifestos, which is both video and includes videos and drawings. And the reason I want to set it up by saying that what you see is a scrolling text of one of the 4 manifestos that's in the installation. It's a manifesto is titled Black Panther. The music that you hear is produced by taking the word letters from the Black Panther text and converting them to musical notation. And so the A's through H's are musical notation, and all of the other letters of the alphabet are either silent beats or rests in the music. So I wanted you to understand that you're listening to something that was produced, a musical score that was produced by the text itself.
So can we play the first video now?
Do we need to move?
So lower the lights.
Yeah, it's over here.
Great. We think that the two pieces really speak to each other, and so I think we'll play them right back to back and then talk about them together. So Andrea, do you want to set this one up?
Sure. Since about 2003, I've been making work pretty much exclusively about activists. And this is a group of activists. There are one of the women is no longer alive. Two of the women are in their late 70s, maybe even 80 now. Pat McGinnis and Lana Phelan. And these are basically, they were fighting for abortion rights prior to the passage of Roe versus Wade in the San Francisco Bay Area. And one of the strategies that they had was to create a list of doctors outside of the United States, particularly in Mexico, who would provide safe abortions for women. So this was before the internet, and a lot of them didn't have telephone numbers. They would find out about them through articles in literally like Playboy and the local free press, in small little newspapers. So basically, they provided these lists from 1964 to 1973. They were nicknamed the Army of Three, and these are people from now reading those letters from the past.
And these are actual historical letters that were sent to these women
Right.
between 63
Sorry, I didn't say that.
and 73. So could we have the second video, please?
I think the piece is something like 60 minutes long, but this is about a 5-minute section. I think it's my earring.
Sorry.
May 21st, 1968, Los Angeles, California. My daughter is mentally ill and is not able to care for a child. Please send me a list of doctors in Tijuana that take care of abortions. Thank you.
March 6th, 1968, Fresno, California. When I called about an abortion, the girl I spoke with said that you only had lists of doctors outside of this country. When I inquired about any in California, she asked if I was willing to take the legal responsibilities. If that is the problem, yes, I would. Prior to speaking with her, however, I understood that the main problem of obtaining the names of any California doctors was a law forbidding sending a list of that sort through the mail. If there is any way of getting a doctor closer than Mexico, the only country of those mentioned to me which is at all feasible, I would be willing to accept the legal responsibilities and come up to San Francisco so you won't need to send anything through the mail.
It's really okay.
I am 9 weeks along, according to my doctor, and need to take care of this very quickly. Could you also give an estimate of cost? If you prefer, and you can help me contact a physician in California, you can call me person-to-person collect. If you can still only give me the name of a Mexican doctor, please use the enclosed envelope as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
This is a lot softer.
Okay, thanks.
It's got to be close.
Yeah.
It's okay. Everybody's ears.
You're taking away from the video.
May 21st, 1968. Los Angeles, California. I received your name and address from my reverend in Santa Monica. I have seen him recently to discuss my problem in detail and have concluded that an abortion is the only answer right now. I am married, but my husband has just been called for jungle training in Korea for a period of active duty for 18 months. I will be self-supporting, so a child would cause too many problems at this time. I want to be sure this is a pretty hygienic group of doctors. I've heard so much about the terrible conditions of Mexico, but I feel that even that I've heard a few bad things, this is the only answer. If you could, I wish you'd rush this to me because my husband is leaving June 4th, and it must be done before then. I would also like to know if any of these doctors would do this on Sunday, because I work all week, and it would be the only day besides Saturday that I could make the trip down there. Please give me the information, and also how to get in contact with them. I can't tell you how important this is, so please hurry. Also, I wish for you to mail the package to my office, but please do not put your return address on the envelope, as my employer is a devout Catholic and I think it may cause trouble.
June 22nd, 1968. A young lady that I've been dating has become pregnant. While we enjoy each other's company, neither of us wishes to be forced into marriage. I don't want her to have to go through a pregnancy, even if she gets all proper medical care. I feel a pregnancy is for those who intend having children with their husbands. The girl's about 2.5 months pregnant, so there are no pills that will help. Where can we get an abortion? Although we'd prefer something local, I'd come north with her in order to prove our sincerity. Please help.
Okay.
Okay. Having Andrea and Charles here together is a little different than often artist conversations where people meet on the stage for the first time. Instead, they've really been having an ongoing conversation for quite some time now. And I thought it would be interesting to change things up a little bit and have them talk about the other one's work and not just their own. So, Charles, or Andrew, which one do you, Charles, do you want to start?
Oh, God.
Okay. Andrew's practice and mine are a little different. First of all, we were interested in focusing on the issue of political content in art and engaging sort of a never-ending debate about, whether politics and art are linked or function as a unit, or whether they're two entirely different domains. And my interest in Andrew's work is that it's very, aside from being dealing with political content, it's activist work. It comes out of this it's an ethical or moral center. And there's a debate about that, because many people feel that art can't function on the level of agency, that it can't sort of change politics, which I always thought was like a ridiculous statement. I mean, the entire range of modernist literature is really based upon the idea of that art can change. I mean, it's like Joseph Conrad and E.M. Forster were political novelists, and they were working against a colonial, the tradition of colonial occupation. and through their literature. And at the same time, they rethought the entire range of how the novel is written. You know, so there's a history to this, but somehow we have this sort of notion that and so I've heard people say about Andrew's work that you know, well, it's too literal, or you know, it doesn't leave room for interpretation. And then on the other side, I've heard people say that Andrew's too involved in aesthetics. You know, that for example, the flowers are thought to be an aesthetic component because it employs certain kind of feelings and sentiments. And it said, well, you know, if you have these sentiments and these things in there, then that undermines the political narrative. And what I noticed is that this kind of critique is sort of worked as a kind of a bookend which excludes the whole possibility of political content in art. And but I think that Andrea's work for me demonstrates that she is actually, in dealing with political content, is actually on the edges of this really sort of theoretical idea of art, that is that she's on the edges of what's permissible in art. That is that the idea of dealing with political content brings in the issue of can political content be dealt with in a work of art. And from my sense, people misread her what they call the aesthetic sentiment. That is that the flowers are not an aesthetic component, but actually a documentarian component. That the flowers actually is part of the letters in the sense that it tropes the issue of the abortion itself. And this is not a metaphor. This is a metonymy, as I like to call it. And so, yeah, so generally that's what that's what I think.
Let's stay there for a minute. One of the things about, I'd like to focus on a couple of things that maybe are similarities in your work and then maybe some differences. And one similarity is the way that you both use systems to produce the work. And you were just talking about the flowers in Andrea's, so that, I mean, in some ways in that video, right, there's a system where there's an individual with a bouquet, and that changes, but it's always the same thing of an individual and a bouquet, so it creates a kind of serial thing, and then you have a dissolve between them.
Right. Well, the dissolve is the exact same time length. You know, it's the exact same amount of seconds. And then each reading is just basically the length of the letter. And I did not use real actors. I sent out an email asking people to volunteer to do it, to read these. And so I used a teleprompter. And it was a very simple strategy, in you know, sort of like an equation in how the piece was made, which I think is similar in Charles's work. You know, like he didn't find music and apply to it because he thought the music had affect or emotion. And I think, you know, first of all, I should say that, you know, I am so grateful for Charles. Charles was one of my teachers at Cal Arts. And I don't think there's a lot of artists who are so scholarly in their practice and knowledgeable of, you know, linguistics and critical theory and really analyzing how visual images work. And at the same time having an incredible political and ethical voice in the work. What Charles does that I don't do is I actually think built into Charles's work is a sort of philosophical analysis of why it's okay, an argument for someone like me to make the work I make. He's making an argument for, within his work is not only political, but it also makes a theoretical argument for why the type of work we make is crucial to exist. And, you know, I'm just beginning to be able to study with Charles. I've been out of school for 25 years, and I aspire to his level of knowledge and criticality, and I learn from it on a daily basis. From this piece in particular, what is most important for me is questioning artists desire to embed emotional content in work. And how does that function? How is it manipulative? And how does, like, and is it just entirely, does it actually, what do I want to say? Does it actually exist? Is this a completely learned, is this a culturally learned emotional experience, right? And what are the hidden power structures that create that emotional experience that we have in relationship to the content? And so this one piece has like thrown my whole practice.
And maybe describe it, and then I can get Charles. Maybe I'll describe it a little. I'm not sure it's entirely clear that the music in Charles's piece is made by taking any time the letters A through H appear in the Black Panther manifesto, they're transcribed into the same musical note. So the letter A turns into the music note A, B, C, and then H is B flat, but that's just because of the strangeness.
Tradition, yeah.
But I mean, in many ways, there's this direct translation, but of course, the two systems don't lie on top of each other in a sort of perfect. You have the extremely powerful, heated rhetoric of the manifesto, and then the music that seems. I mean, to me, it sounds a little bit like Cage or one of the 60s or 70s composers sort of breaking out of serial music. But, you know, Charles, how do you feel about that, the relationship between the music and the text of the piece?
The relationship between the music and text is not produced by my will or intention. So I had no idea.
Is that me?
Yeah, I
I'm
don't
not
know.
moving.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this on now? Okay. So I had no idea what it would sound like as I was transcribing, and none of us musicians or anybody had no idea until we started playing. So the music seems connected, really connected to the text. It produces an emotional space around the language of the text that is open for interpretation. My interest is to understand how you brought, how convincingly you bring these two things together, but at the same time, you know that it's arbitrary. One of the things that I discover in presentations is that nobody believes it, because it seems so willful. And what Andrea was talking about, it links up here. I wanted to say that culturally and socially, we negotiate the relationship of feelings and meaning. That all content we have are made meaningful through our feelings, and we negotiate that relationship culturally, rather than it being divinely inspired, which I think Andrew is referring to in terms of the tradition of art practice, that art is really an emotional practice, and that is somehow related and comes, sort of out of an internal subjectivity.
Now I think, thinking about some ways that the two of your work, while both political, is very different, is that, Charles, in your work, it's a lot about accident, disaster. I don't know how many of you know Charles' famous piece where an airplane that crashes into a city on a time clock, or your falling rock, which there's a large rock with a sheet of glass underneath, and every few minutes the piece comes down and breaks the glass. And it seems to me that history in some ways for you is like the angel in Walter Benjamin, where it says that most of us see history as just a chain of events, but for the angel who can step back, it's actually one single catastrophe. And Andrea, in your case, as you said, you've been recovering these largely forgotten activist histories and going back to the individual, both artists and activists, and really documenting, in a sense, the communal impact that these individuals had.
I mean, I think that I went to CalArts in the early 90s, 90 to 92. So I've always been, I'm not an institutional critique artist, but the questions around how an artist keeps a sense of autonomy within the institution, or can you have a practice outside the institution? This is one of the big questions that I struggle with a lot still today. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I think an artwork can do when working within institutions, and how an institution can help serve ideas. And one of the things I have been trying to insert what I think are kind of like under-recorded political actions or activists, or that into like the imagery of art history, thinking about art, collections, and it becomes part of this kind of vault of imagery that people access. And so I have tried to pay tribute or memorialize certain people or events, and then make renderings or videos or books of those things, and so that they become part of the discourse of contemporary art, I guess, which is, I don't know, now you and your disasters.
The difference between us, I think, is that whereas Andrea goes right to the politics of documents, I think that I use those documents to offer some theory of representation. Mm-hmm. So, and she asked me a good question one time and asked me, what do I think I do to the representation by theorizing them? Do I think I diminish their importance? And I couldn't answer it. I still haven't figured it out. If anybody has an answer for me, I'd appreciate it.
But that's one, you only saw in each of these artists' case a small piece of a larger work. And it's something that we can talk about, that both of you have drawings associated with the videos. In Andrea's case, there's also a book. Mm-hmm. So the making these multi-part works, and how the sort of art and politics works through that.
Well, I mean, I think that all of my work literally starts with the politics. I often have these conversations, sometimes with curators, or I don't know, just people who they want to ignore the politics and try to empty it out. But my work doesn't exist without the political content of what it's about. And like, for instance, this piece is a really simple strategy, which is, I'm a feminist, and the history of the representation of women, if you think about the history of art, has been like, objectifying women by putting them, like portraits of them with flower vases, right? So I was just simply trying to take that tradition and turn it upside down, or turn it on its head, to see if I, just through them having voices and speaking, if the flowers would actually intensify their words rather than empty out their words. And it was really more of an experiment to see how that would work.
And as we were talking a little bit before, this idea that there's a separable political content and then there's the art.
Right.
In the case of this piece, for instance, if you take out the politics, you're left with merely still lives.
portraits with flower vases, still lives in portraiture, right? Right. So it has no, it's missing its content. I mean, I think, I was trained by conceptualists, and I always start with an idea, as does Charles, and then we pretty much come up with a strategy for how to execute it, and it gets executed, right? I mean, I don't know.
In the conversation with Andrew, we began to think about the issue of political content as something that's similar to what happened with the avant-garde. I was talking to a Fluxus artist, or the original Fluxus artist, who said that their critique was really a political critique, but they were critiquing certain power arrangements in Western and European art, so it's generally become accepted as art because the critique took place within art. Now, when you bring in a critique that's outside of art, like abortion or race or something like that, suddenly people think that is unrelated. Now, Andrew said something interesting. He said that, well, Jackson Pollock, as an expressionist painter, the politics in the work has to do with its resistance to European convention. If you took the politics out of Jackson Pollock, you would have nothing left. I think it's the same metaphor or analogy you can make with any kind of political content as applied to any kind of art, particularly in Andrea's case, where it's unimaginable without the politics.
I think that we've reached the point where we could take one or two questions and then.
I'm just curious.
And you're on.
I'm curious what your next projects are, each of you.
What's your next project? Charles, you want to start?
Well, I'm working on a project now where can I simply say it? I'm taking a page out of certain political narratives, like, for example, Frantz Fanon, and I'm editing the page by arbitrarily selecting the words on the page and through a system reorganize them so that it produces a new text. It's applied to, it's rigorously attached to the system because in no way can I add or subtract words. But what I'm doing here that I hadn't done before is that I'm increased the level of my subjectivity in how these pages are edited. I have to work with existing content, but I can rearrange them in any way that I want. The result is these sort of really interesting and hyperbolic texts, way more hyperbolic than its source, but maintaining the original content.
And Andrea?
Both Charles and I work a lot with archives and researching. So I'm actually working on a project, this print with the Getty, which has turned into a much bigger project for me because I had the fortune through Andrew and Glenn to be introduced to this amazing collection of photographs and political flyers from the, 60s to the 80s, maybe?
60. Could you put the PDF up on the screen?
Of this California political journalist, Charles Britton. Charles is in his 80s now.
Yeah.
And so this is just like, these are going to be silk screens, and these are just some of Charles's images. And so I don't really, I've made these prints, there's 4 of them, and they all connect together, and I think they'll be gifts to people, right, that the Getty will be giving. But
and you can scroll through.
Yeah, you can just scroll through them. I mean, he was the official photographer for the LA Black Panthers. He photographed feminist marches. He photographed the farm workers. He photographed the anti-war movement. He photographed the Peace Tower. He was the official photographer for the Eames. I mean, the man's amazing. So I don't really know. I have some ideas for drawings from his archive. I don't really know where I'm going with it, and then I have to hassle with them to do that. So we'll figure that out. And then, I'm somebody who, like, I don't really think about projects for shows. Like, eventually I do, but what I tend to do is watch and read the news all day, every day, and try to find something that's happening. So I don't know if I'll do anything with it. I'm really interested in what's going on with these DREAM Act kids right now. You know, the kids who have been in the United States since they were like 5, and they're like, you know, one of them is like the majorette for USC. You know, like these amazingly accomplished young people who are the American dream, but they're not documented. And so they've come out officially and publicly said, we're not documented and we want this DREAM Act to pass. I don't know if I can get them to talk to me, but I'm really interested in that. And there is a Black Panther who is a San Francisco 8 member who's in his 70s, who is just amazingly inspiring. And I want to videotape him, and I've talked to him about it. I just haven't done it. So I don't know which of those projects I'll do.
Do we have time for one more? Is there another question? Okay. Well, let me just, all of the texts in that print edition are things that Andrea found in old flyers for protests and other things, so that one of the things you did is really mated the images and the text together.
Charles saved, whenever he would go to a protest, he would save all the flyers, and so I used those texts throughout the bottom. Whoops. And the other thing that he did is he actually designed a lot of the political flyers for the protests. And so that's what's at the bottom. And those colors are not right. They're going to be fluorescent, but you can't digitally get fluorescent colors. So anyway.
Well, please join me in thanking Andrea and Charles. And please also put October of 2011 on your calendars, when the 48 exhibitions in Southern California are going to open, and we're going to get to see the work of hundreds of LA artists. Thanks.
Thank you.